I blew out the candle, and nothing wished for came true. The words left Mara's lips before she realized she'd spoken them aloud. The diner was empty, as it always was after midnight, the rain pressing in against the windows like a restless sea. Neon light from the open sign flickered pink across the chrome counters, staining the puddles on the floor like spilled blood. She sat alone in the corner booth, the same one that smelled faintly of coffee and loneliness, staring at the single cupcake she'd bought from the discount shelf on her way to work. Its frosting had melted into a sad, sugary slump, the candle bending sideways, as if too tired to stand. 30 years old today, and not one person had remembered. Not her co-workers, not the friends who used to promise to visit, not even her mother, lost somewhere in the static of old arguments and unanswered calls. She had learned to stop expecting warmth from people. It was easier to love silence than disappointment. The diner clock hummed above the jukebox, each tick a reminder of hours that belonged to no one. Outside, the highway stretched into mist and mountain shadow. Mara pushed the cupcake away and began wiping down the tables. Her wrists ached from the day's shift, her fingertips raw from bleach and broken glass. The storm outside deepened, thunder crawling across the peaks like something alive. Power lines trembled, lights dimmed, and for a heartbeat, the diner was plunged into blackness. When they flickered back, she heard it, a note of music drifting through the storm. Faint, unplaceable, impossibly delicate, like a lullaby remembered from someone else's childhood. She froze, listening. The sound came again, threading between thunderclaps, a tune carried on the wind that should not have been there. It wasn't from any station on the radio. She'd turned that off hours ago. It seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere at once, seeping through the walls, humming softly under her skin. She told herself it was the storm, some trick of pressure and metal, but the melody lingered, haunting in its sweetness. She found herself whispering along, not knowing why the tune felt so familiar. When the light steadied, she noticed something odd. On the glass door, beneath the neon's reflection, a shape moved. Something fluttered, pale and deliberate, pressed against the entrance, as if the rain itself were trying to deliver a message. Mara hesitated. Fear wasn't unfamiliar. Living alone on the night shift taught her to expect strange noises, the groan of pipes or the distant wail of coyotes. But this was different. There was intention in the motion, rhythm where chaos should be. She stepped closer and saw it clearly. A crimson envelope, soaked through but perfectly sealed, pinned beneath the edge of the door. Her name was written across it in handwriting that looked ancient and elegant, the ink dark as spilled wine. Mara Vance. No address, no return mark, just the name, and beneath it, a small symbol, a crown crossed by a single drop of blood. The logical part of her mind whispered all the usual reasons to ignore it. Junk mail, prank, wrong address. But another voice, quieter and deeper, told her that something waited on the other side of that envelope. She unlocked the door and reached into the rain. The moment her fingers brushed the paper, the thunder outside stopped. Not faded. Stopped. The silence that followed was total, like the entire world had paused to watch her next move. She shivered and pulled the envelope free. Its wax seal glowed faintly when she brought it under the diner's fluorescent light. The symbol seemed to breathe. The air smelled of iron and wild roses. She broke the seal before she could think better of it. Inside was a folded parchment, the kind used in old letters and royal decrees. Her name appeared again at the top, followed by a single line written in that same dark ink. You are cordially summoned to the Crimson Court on the eve of your birth. Below it, a time. Midnight. a location. The place where you last wished not to be alone. Her pulse stumbled. The only place she'd ever wished that, she realized, was here, in this diner, 1 year ago to the day, her last birthday shift, when she'd whispered those same words into a melting candle and felt the universe turn away. She laughed shakily. Very funny, she muttered to no one. Somebody's got a sick sense of humor. But she couldn't shake the weight of the paper in her hands. It was heavier than it should have been, faintly warm, and when she tilted it toward the light, she saw something shimmer in the ink. Tiny runes curling beneath the words, like veins of gold pulsing under skin. She locked the door, trying to convince herself to throw it away, but instead she placed it on the counter beside the cash register and kept glancing at it as she cleaned. Midnight wasn't far. The wind outside had gone eerily still. Every few minutes, she caught glimpses of movement beyond the glass. A figure at the edge of the road, perhaps, or the outline of something tall against the storm's reflection. Each time she blinked, it vanished. She told herself it was headlights from passing trucks, but none came by. The highway was empty. Even the rain seemed to be holding its breath. At 11:30, the lights flickered again. The jukebox turned on by itself, playing a song she didn't recognize. A slow, mournful waltz that matched the melody she'd heard in the storm. The voice that sang it was low, ancient, and unbearably sad. The words weren't in any language she knew, yet she understood them. I remember your wish, forgotten child. I remember your candle in the dark. She should have been terrified. Instead, tears pricked her eyes. The loneliness she'd buried for years rose like a tide. For the first time, she felt seen, and that was far more dangerous than fear. The bell above the door chimed once, though no one had entered. The smell of rain thickened, mingling with something else. Myrrh, iron, a trace of smoke. The candle on her cupcake flared to life without a spark, its flame steady and blue. The clock struck 12. Mara turned toward the door just as the shadow stepped inside. He was tall enough that he had to duck beneath the frame, his presence dimming the neon light behind him. Water dripped from the hem of a long coat, the color of midnight. His face was carved in sharp, impossible symmetry, pale as moonlight, his eyes a deep, unearthly crimson. For one heartbeat, Mara thought he might be an illusion, conjured by exhaustion and solitude. Then he spoke, and his voice carried the same melody that had haunted the storm. Happy birthday, Mara Vance. She stared, unable to speak. The stranger smiled faintly, revealing the edge of a fang as if it were an afterthought rather than a threat. Forgive the intrusion, he continued, glancing around the empty diner with mild curiosity. This is where you made the wish, isn't it? Mara's throat tightened. Who are you? Someone who remembers forgotten things. His gaze fell on the letter beside the register. And someone whose invitation you accepted. I didn't accept anything. His smile deepened, not cruel, but knowing. You opened it. That was enough. The lights dimmed to a soft red glow, casting the diner in the hue of fresh embers. Outside, lightning spidered across the sky, illuminating the mountains in stark white. Mara's heartbeat thundered in her ears, yet some part of her refused to step back. If this is a prank, she said, it's not funny. A prank? He seemed amused by the word, tasting it like something unfamiliar. No, Mara, this is a promise. He reached into his coat and drew out something small, another candle, twin to hers but made of black wax. He placed it beside the cupcake. The two flames wavered, then merged into one, burning a shade of crimson that painted both their faces in strange warmth. She felt the world tilt, the air trembling with invisible energy. Somewhere far away, bells began to toll. Deep, resonant, inhuman. The sound rolled through the mountains like a heartbeat echoing across centuries. "What do you want from me?" she whispered. His eyes softened, and for the first time she saw sorrow there, ancient and bottomless. "To give you what you asked for," he said. "Not to be forgotten." The candle flame bent toward him, as if drawn by invisible breath. Shadows gathered behind him, forming the faint outline of an archway. Stone, ornate, carved with the same sigil as the letter. Through it, she glimpsed a hall of endless mirrors and crimson light. She should have run. Any sane person would have, but Mara took a step closer instead. The rain began again, pounding against the windows like applause. "Who are you?" she asked again, softer now. The stranger's answer was almost a confession. "Lucien Draviker, King of the Crimson Court." He extended his hand, gloved in black leather. "And tonight, Mara Vance, you are expected." The flame between them flared, casting the diner's walls in living red. The clock struck 1, though it should have only been midnight still. Somewhere in the distance, the melody began again, sweeter and more sorrowful than before, and the door behind the vampire king opened onto a darkness filled with stars. Mara hesitated only a moment, then reached out and took his hand. The last thing she saw before the light swallowed them both was her own reflection in the chrome counter, eyes wide, hair damp with rain, a faint smile curving her lips. For the first time in years, she didn't look forgotten. She looked chosen. And as the diner faded into silence, the single cupcake sat untouched, its candle still burning long after the storm had passed. The first thing Mara noticed was the sound, or rather, the absence of it. The rain, the hum of the diner, the distant trucks, all of it vanished the moment her fingers brushed Lucien's hand. Silence poured over her like ink. Then the world unfolded in a rush of color so deep and alien it stole her breath. She stood on marble that glowed faintly from within, veins of scarlet light running through black stone like captured lightning. Above her stretched a ceiling that wasn't a ceiling at all, but a vast night sky sealed inside crystal, every star pulsing faintly as if alive. The air tasted metallic, like snow before a storm, and somewhere far below came the rhythmic pulse of drums, low and ancient. She realized she was standing in a hall, though hall was too small a word for the scale of it. The walls rose like cliffs carved from obsidian, draped in banners of crimson velvet. Dozens of tall windows lined the sides, yet no sunlight filtered through them, only the pale glow of a blood-colored moon that hung impossibly close, as if the entire realm were built within its reflection. Lucien still held her hand, and when she tried to pull away, she found her body too light, as if gravity worked differently here. "Where are we?" she managed, her voice sounding faint and strange in the vast chamber. "The Crimson Court," he said simply, his tone both reverent and weary. "My kingdom. Or what remains of it." He released her then, and the moment his skin left hers, she felt cold rush in like a tide. Mara crossed her arms, glancing around for something that resembled a door back home, but all she saw were arches and staircases twisting into shadow. "I didn't agree to this," she said. "I don't even know what this is." Lucien tilted his head, studying her as if she were a puzzle that refused to solve itself. "You opened the invitation," he said. "That makes you part of the covenant. You've crossed the threshold between worlds, and the court recognizes you now." "Recognizes me?" she echoed, fighting the tremor in her voice. "I'm a waitress, not a whatever you are." King, he said quietly, almost regretfully. Vampire, if you must name it. But titles are less important than purpose. He stepped closer, the faint shimmer of his cloak catching the moonlight. Someone, or something, sent my seal to you. That cannot happen without cause. The sigil answers only to blood. Mine. Mara blinked, unsure if he was accusing her or confessing. Maybe someone else forged it. Impossible, he murmured. The wax was bound to my name. The fact that it reached you means either my bloodline is being manipulated or... He trailed off, his eyes narrowing as if he'd glimpsed something through her that she couldn't see herself. Or you are not as human as you believe. The words stung more than they should have. She took a step back. Look, I just wanted to go home. I didn't ask for any of this. Home? His voice softened, almost kind. You crossed the veil. There is no easy return until the moon completes its cycle. One night, here, equals 1 week in your world. Time bends differently between realms. Mara's stomach turned. The thought of her tiny apartment sitting dark for days, while no one even noticed she was missing, made her heart ache with the dull, familiar weight of being forgotten. Maybe no one would care at all. She steadied herself. Then I'll wait. I'll stay out of your way. Just don't make this into something it's not. Lucian's gaze flickered toward the great doors at the far end of the hall, where movement stirred in the shadows. It is already something it shouldn't be, he said, and we are no longer alone. Figures emerged from the darkness, dozens of them, tall and graceful, each dressed in garments that shimmered like liquid night. Their faces were pale as frost, their eyes various shades of crimson and gold, and they moved with a quiet, predatory grace that made every instinct in Mara scream to run. At their head was a woman whose beauty was as precise as a blade. Her hair fell in silver waves, her lips the color of dried roses, her expression unreadable. When she bowed to Lucian, it was with the slow reverence of someone who feared him as much as she despised him. "My king," she said, her voice echoing through the hall. The council assembled when the seal awakened. We felt it burn across the wards. You said that Mark was lost. Yet here you stand, bringing a mortal who carries its scent. Mara felt the weight of every gaze shift toward her, sharp as knives. Lucien's jaw tightened. The seal found her. She did not seek it. You brought her here, the woman said, stepping closer, her eyes glittering. That act alone binds her to our laws, and those laws are clear. Mortals who cross the threshold uninvited must answer to the court. She was invited, Lucian said, his tone darkening, by my own crest. A ripple of murmurs moved through the gathered vampires, a wave of disbelief and offense. Then you admit she carries royal blood magic, another voice said from the crowd. That cannot be allowed. Mara took a shaky breath. Excuse me, but I'm standing right here, and I don't have any magic. I barely have health insurance. The words escaped before she could stop them, and for a split second, silence froze again, followed by the faintest sound. Laughter. Dry, mocking laughter. Lucian turned his head sharply toward the source, and the sound died at once. Enough, he commanded. The authority in his voice made even the air seem to kneel. He looked back at her, and the anger in his face softened into something else. Worry, perhaps, or the reluctant realization that he'd dragged an innocent into something monstrous. You will not be harmed, he said quietly, so that only she could hear, as long as you stay close to me. And if I don't? She asked, matching his whisper. His eyes flickered red, luminous and fragile as candlelight. Then they'll taste your fear before dawn." The councilwoman, the one with silver hair, stepped forward again. "You defy your own decrees, Lucian. You of all kings should understand what it means when the sigil burns after centuries of silence. It is a summons, not a gift. If the seal has chosen this mortal, then something in your blood is being tested. The old prophecy speaks of balance between the living and the lost." "Prophecy," Mara repeated, her voice faint. "You keep using that word like I'm supposed to understand it." The woman ignored her. "You risk everything for sentiment, my king. Perhaps she's a lure sent by the old enemies to weaken you." Lucian's gaze turned cold. "Perhaps you forget to whom you speak." Shadows thickened around him as he spoke, twisting like smoke rising from invisible fire. "The seal is mine. The decision is mine. I will discover its meaning, and until I do, she is under my protection." Mara felt the room shift. The others bowed, though the gesture carried more bitterness than obedience. The silver-haired woman's eyes lingered on her with quiet fury before she lowered her head. "As you command, my king," she said. "But if your mercy blinds you, remember, mercy once ended empires." When they withdrew into the shadows, Lucien exhaled slowly, as if holding the weight of 1,000 years in his lungs. Mara's voice trembled when she finally spoke. "They hate me." "They fear you," he corrected. "Fear is older than hate." He turned toward a grand staircase spiraling upward into darkness. "Come. The seal binds you to me now. You must stay within the king's ward until sunrise. It will protect you from misunderstandings." She followed because the alternative was to be left alone in a place that seemed built to devour solitude. As they climbed, torches along the walls flared to life one by one, reacting to his presence. "What's a ward?" she asked. "A boundary," he said. "My private domain. No one can cross it without permission. So basically, house arrest." He almost smiled. "If that helps you sleep." "You think I'll sleep after?" She stopped as they reached a balcony overlooking the grand hall. From up here, she could see the vastness of the kingdom beyond. Towers built from red stone rising through mist, bridges of light connecting them, rivers that glowed faintly like veins of molten silver. It was terrible and breathtaking, like standing inside a dream carved out of sorrow. "How long has this place existed?" she asked. "Longer than memory," Lucien said. "And yet, every century, it feels emptier." He opened a pair of tall doors carved with symbols she couldn't read. Inside stretched a chamber bathed in faint blue fire, walls lined with mirrors that reflected her from every impossible angle. A single throne stood at the center, forged from obsidian and bone. When Lucien stepped inside, the flames bent toward him like living things. He turned back to her, his expression unreadable. "You should rest. The bond between you and the seal will start to reveal itself soon. You may feel changes." "Changes?" she repeated, her heart skipping. "What kind of changes?" "Nothing harmful," he said, too quickly to be reassuring. "But until I understand why the seal chose you, you must trust me." Mara swallowed. Trust wasn't something she handed out easily, least of all to ancient strangers with fangs. But standing there, beneath the crimson moon, she realized she already had. Something in his voice, in the sadness that threaded through his calm, felt achingly familiar. It was the same tone she used when she told herself she was fine while eating cake alone. He looked like someone who'd been alone too long to remember how not to be. She sat on the edge of the marble floor, drawing her knees to her chest. "I should be scared of you," she said. "You are," he replied softly. but not enough. Their eyes met, and for a long moment neither spoke. Then the silence broke with the faint echo of that same melody she'd heard in the storm. It came from nowhere this time, yet Lucian flinched as if struck. The tune coiled through the air, mournful and delicate, carrying a memory that didn't belong to her. "That song," he whispered. "How do you know it?" "I don't," she said. "It just followed me." His expression changed, the mask of control slipping to reveal a flash of disbelief. "It was sung only once, long ago, on the night the Crimson Court fell into shadow." Mara's pulse quickened. "Then why do I know it?" "Because," he said slowly, as if each word was dangerous to speak, "the last person who sang it was my queen." The silence that followed was suffocating, full of ghosts neither of them could see. And though Mara didn't yet understand what it meant, she felt the weight of destiny settle quietly on her shoulders, binding her to a world that had just begun to wake from its endless night. The chamber remained dim long after the echoes of the strange melody faded, as if the very walls held their breath in the song's wake. Mara sat motionless, feeling the cold pulse of the marble beneath her palms, watching Lucian pace the length of the room like a predator trapped in his own cage. He kept glancing at her as though seeing her for the first time, and she couldn't tell whether what flickered in his eyes was awe or suspicion. "You shouldn't know that tune," he said finally, his voice low, almost reverent. "No mortal could." She wanted to tell him that she didn't know it, that it had followed her from her world like a whisper through a dream, but the words caught in her throat. Something about the way he said mortal, like it was a temporary condition rather than a species, made her shiver. "You keep saying I shouldn't be here," she said, her voice trembling but defiant. "So send me back." Lucienne turned toward her, the moonlight striking the planes of his face like a blade. "It's not that simple. The seal won't allow it. Once it chooses, it binds until purpose is fulfilled." "Purpose," she repeated. "And what purpose could it possibly have with me?" He looked away, his jaw tightening. "That's what I intend to discover." The next hours blurred. He showed her to a smaller chamber adjoining his own, though smaller was a relative word, since the room still could have fit her entire apartment twice over. The bed was made of carved stone draped in black silk, and a single window overlooked the endless valley below, where rivers of red light wound through mist like veins of a sleeping god. "You'll be safe here," he said, his tone clipped. "No one in the court would dare cross my threshold." Mara forced a hollow laugh. "That's comforting." "You don't believe me." "I don't even know what to believe," she said, exhaustion softening her anger. "None of this feels real." He studied her quietly for a moment, then reached out, brushing a strand of wet hair from her face with unexpected gentleness. "Reality bends easily around those who refuse to be forgotten," he murmured. "Sleep, Mara. You'll need strength for what's coming." When she woke, it was to the sound of whispering, hundreds of indistinct voices overlapping like leaves rustling underwater. She sat up sharply, the air shimmered faintly, and for an instant, she saw ghostly figures moving through the walls, pale as moonlight, their faces blurred, but their eyes bright with sorrow. "Lucienne!" she gasped, stumbling from the bed. The door opened almost instantly, though she hadn't heard footsteps. He entered, his expression alert, crimson irises glowing faintly. "You heard them?" "What are they?" she asked. "Echoes," he said. "Fragments of souls bound to this place. The court feeds on memory as much as blood. They whisper to those who carry its mark." "Its mark?" she repeated, and he reached out, taking her wrist gently. Where his skin touched hers, The faint outline of a sigil glowed just beneath her flesh, the same crown crossed by a drop of blood that had sealed the letter. The sight made her dizzy. "It's on me," she whispered. "Why is it on me?" "Because the seal claimed you," he said softly. "It's a bond older than my reign. My blood calls to yours now, and yours to mine. That's why the song returned. The bond remembers what the world forgot." She pulled her hand away, panic rising. "No, I don't want this." "I didn't ask for it." "Nor did I," he said quietly. And for the first time, she heard weariness in his voice, something that went deeper than age. "But the seal doesn't ask. It takes what it needs. And what does it need from me? Perhaps mercy," he said after a pause. "Perhaps a reminder of what it means to be alive." Before she could respond, the torches along the wall flared bright white, a sign of intrusion. Lucian turned sharply, his expression hardening. "Stay here." He moved toward the doors, shadows gathering around him like armor. But before he reached them, they burst open, revealing a figure Mara recognized from the night before, the silver-haired woman from the council. She bowed just low enough to satisfy decorum. "My king," she said, "forgive the intrusion, but the court demands an audience. The sigil's activation has stirred unrest among the lower houses. They believe the mortal's presence signals the fulfillment of the Crimson Prophecy." Lucian's eyes narrowed. "They will believe what I tell them to believe." "Even so," she continued smoothly, "rumors spread faster than decrees. They say your power wanes, that the seal has passed to another." Her gaze slid toward Mara like a blade. "That your crown no longer answers to its rightful master." Mara stiffened, feeling the weight of that look. "Tell them," Lucian said, his voice like thunder beneath ice, "that their king still breathes, and as long as he does, his rule is absolute." "Words," the woman murmured. "But they will want proof." "Blood proof." Lucian stepped closer, his shadow spilling across the floor like ink. "Careful, Celine. You walk the edge of treason." "I walk the edge of extinction," she snapped, her composure cracking. "If the prophecy is true, your bond with this human will unmake the boundaries between our kind. Do you think the council will allow that?" Her gaze softened then, almost pitying. "You should have let her die before the seal took root." Mara flinched at the cruelty in the statement, but before she could react, Lucien was suddenly between them, his presence blotting out the light. "Get out," he said quietly, and the air trembled with his anger. "You forget yourself." Celine bowed again, though her smile was sharp. "As you command, my king. But remember, chains forged by mercy are still chains." When she was gone, the silence left behind felt heavy enough to crush bone. Lucien turned to Mara, and for the first time, she saw uncertainty in his face. "They'll come for you," he said simply. "The court won't rest until they understand what you are." "I already told you," she whispered. "I'm no one." "No," he said. "You're someone the world forgot, and that makes you dangerous." He moved closer, his voice dropping. "There's a way to hide you from them, to mask the mark until I can discover why it bound itself to you." "How?" she asked. "By completing the bond." He held her gaze, unflinching. "A drop of my blood mixed with yours. It will link our essence, shield you from detection, and make it appear as though you are under my protection." "Under your protection," she repeated slowly. "You mean your possession." "Protection," he corrected, though his tone wavered. "You won't be enslaved, Mara, but you will be bound." She looked down at her wrist, the faint sigil pulsing like a heartbeat. Something inside her, a memory or instinct she didn't recognize, told her that refusing would bring worse things than surrender. And if I say no, then they'll find you before dawn. He extended his hand, palm up. His blood shimmered black-red, like molten rubies under glass. Mara hesitated, her mind screaming that this was madness. Yet she also remembered the letter, the candle, the voice that had said, "I remember your wish." Some part of her wanted to believe that wish had been heard. Slowly, she reached out and let a single drop of his blood fall onto her skin. It burned, then cooled, then spread like fire through her veins. She gasped, gripping the edge of the bed as visions exploded behind her eyes. Vast fields of crimson flowers, a woman in silver weeping over a shattered crown, and a child with Lucian's eyes reaching for her across centuries. When it was over, she found herself trembling, the mark on her wrist now glowing faint gold instead of red. Lucian exhaled, relief flickering across his face. "It worked," he said softly. "The court won't sense you now. They'll believe you're mine." "Yours," she repeated, her voice a whisper. "And what does that make you to me?" He hesitated. "Your guardian, your bond-bearer." She looked up at him, and in that moment, she saw the truth. He was lying, not in words, but in restraint. The bond had tied them both more deeply than either expected. The hours that followed passed in uneasy silence. Lucian stood by the window, watching the crimson horizon fade into black, while Mara sat on the bed, feeling the strange new rhythm inside her chest, half hers, half something older. When she finally spoke, her voice was softer than she intended. "You said the seal remembers what the world forgot. What does that mean?" He didn't look at her when he answered. "It means the bond doesn't just connect blood. It connects grief. The court was born from a vow of mourning. Every king inherits the sorrow of the one before him. Perhaps it found you because you carried sorrow enough to answer its call." She thought of her birthday candle, the wish whispered into darkness, the hollow ache of being unseen. Maybe he was right. Maybe her loneliness had been a kind of beacon. "What happens now?" she asked. He turned finally, and his eyes softened, though the weight of centuries still shadowed them. "Now," he said, "we find out why the curse broke its silence for you." That night, Mara dreamed of light pouring through broken stained glass, of a hand reaching out of the dark to hers, of a voice whispering a name that wasn't hers, but felt like it could have been. When she woke, Lucian was still by the window, unmoving, the faintest smile on his lips, as if he'd seen the same dream. The bond between them hummed like a living thing. Neither spoke of it, but both knew the truth. The choice she made to take his blood had tied her fate to his. And somewhere beyond the stone walls of the Crimson Court, unseen eyes watched the first human in history bear the mark of a vampire king, and whispered that destiny had begun to turn again. The days that followed blurred into a strange rhythm of twilight and crimson glow, time moving in uneven breaths, as if the castle itself inhaled and exhaled with the pulse of the blood moon. Mara learned that the court never truly slept. The corridors whispered at all hours, servants gliding soundlessly through torchlit halls, courtiers appearing and vanishing like reflections in water. Yet wherever she went, she felt the same thing, the invisible tug of Lucian's presence, the faint hum of the bond that thrummed between them like a hidden heartbeat. It frightened her at first, that sense of being tethered to something she couldn't see. But over time, it became a strange comfort, a thread of warmth in a world of stone and shadow. She found herself studying him when he spoke to the nobles, his voice calm and commanding, even as the room simmered with unspoken rebellion. He treated her with an odd formality, as though unsure whether to view her as a guest, a danger, or a prophecy made flesh. Yet, in the quiet hours when the court retreated and the torches dimmed, he would sometimes sit with her in the chamber by the high windows, the two of them separated by a silence that felt more intimate than conversation. The castle was changing too. Small things at first, the way the torches flickered with golden light instead of white, the faint scent of rain replacing the heavy incense of blood and dust. The servants whispered that the mortal woman had awakened the wards, that the Crimson Court was breathing again for the first time in centuries. Lucian dismissed their superstition publicly, but in private, his expression betrayed a different truth. "They're not wrong," he admitted one evening, his eyes fixed on the flickering glow of the hearth. "When you arrived, the wards flared back to life. I felt the castle stir, as if remembering itself." Mara stared into the fire. "So, what does that mean? That I broke your curse?" "Perhaps you reminded it of mercy," he said, and his tone was not one of accusation, but of quiet wonder, as if mercy were a language he'd forgotten how to speak. The fragile peace they built could not last. Word spread through the vampire courts beyond the castle walls, carried by ravens and rumor. A human had been bound by the royal seal. A mortal woman shared the blood of the king. To some, it was blasphemy. To others, proof that the ancient prophecy was unfolding, the one that spoke of the living bond, the moment when life and death would meet and change the nature of both. The outer courts demanded answers, their envoys arriving beneath banners of black and gold. The air in the throne room turned colder with every meeting. Lucian handled them with unyielding poise, but Mara saw the strain in his hands, the slight tremor when he unclenched his fist after each confrontation. "They think I'm weakening you," she said, one night after the envoys had gone. He gave a quiet, humorless laugh. "They've mistaken compassion for weakness since the beginning of time. To them, anything not born of dominance is decay." "And what do you think?" she asked. "I think," he said, looking at her, with eyes that seemed to hold the entire history of loneliness, "that I would rather be weakened by kindness than strengthened by cruelty." He began to teach her the ways of his world, not through command, but through story. She learned that the Crimson Court had once been a sanctuary where both vampires and humans lived in fragile harmony, before fear turned faith into chains. The queen, his queen, had been human once, a healer who believed love could temper immortality. When she died, that vision died with her, and the king who survived her became something else. As Lucian spoke of her, Mara heard the fracture in his voice that no centuries could mend. "She believed the heart was stronger than hunger," he said softly. "I wanted to believe her. But when she was gone, all I saw was the cruelty of her absence." "Maybe she was right," Mara said. "Maybe love was the only thing strong enough to survive this place." He didn't answer, but the look in his eyes said everything. The next evening brought a message sealed in obsidian wax, delivered by a guard who refused to meet the king's gaze. The crest on it belonged to the Outer Council, a faction that had long opposed Lucian's rule. He broke the seal, scanned the parchment, and his expression turned unreadable. "They're summoning me to the council fortress at dusk," he said. "They claim it's to discuss the seal, but it's a demand disguised as diplomacy." "Then don't go," Mara said, her stomach tightening. "You don't have to answer to them." "If I refuse," he replied, "they'll send others, ones less inclined to talk." He turned to her, his voice softening. "The monastery lies beyond the northern pass, protected by ancient wards. You'll be safe there until I return." "Safe?" she echoed. "From what?" He hesitated. "From the court's fear. Fear makes monsters even of kings." That night, under the shroud of mist and crimson moonlight, he brought her through the castle gates. The journey was silent except for the sound of wind moving through skeletal trees. The road wound upward toward the mountains, where the monastery slept in ruin, its walls wrapped in ivy and frost. "This place once belonged to my queen," he said quietly as they entered the courtyard. "She built it as a refuge for the dying, human and immortal alike. When she was gone, I sealed it. But its wards still answer to my blood." He pricked his thumb with a fang, let a single drop fall to the stone threshold, and the air shimmered with pale gold light. "No one can enter without permission now." Mara glanced around, the ancient arches whispering with echoes of prayers. "It's beautiful," she said. "And lonely." "Like all sanctuaries," he murmured. Inside, the monastery felt alive, humming faintly beneath its silence. The walls glowed with traces of the same gold that had flared beneath his blood. He showed her to a small room near the chapel, its bed lined with furs, the window opening onto the mountains. "I'll return before the next dawn," he said, lingering at the doorway. "No one can reach you here. The wards will hold." She hesitated before asking the question that had burned on her tongue for days. "If your queen built this place for mercy, why did your kind forget how to show it?" He looked at her, and for a moment the king disappeared, leaving only a man worn by centuries of regret. "Because mercy demands loss," he said. "And immortals fear loss more than death." She wanted to say something, anything, to ease the heaviness between them, but the words that came out were simple. "You'll come back." "You have my bond," he said, as if that were answer enough. He turned to leave, then stopped, glancing back at her. "The song you hum in your sleep, don't stop singing it. It keeps the shadows quiet." Before she could ask how he knew, he was gone, the echo of his departure folding into the night like the closing of a book. For the first time since crossing into his world, Mara was alone. She walked through the empty corridors, tracing her fingers along the faded frescoes that lined the walls. Angels and vampires, depicted side by side, wings and fangs blending into one another. In the chapel, a broken stained glass window cast pale moonlight across the altar. She sat beneath it and listened to the mountain wind move through the hollow halls. For a moment, she felt something she hadn't felt in years. Peace. Yet beneath it lurked unease, a pulse in the air like a heart beating beneath the floor. The bond inside her flickered, an ache low in her chest that told her Lucian was far away, but not beyond reach. When the first tremor shook the monastery, it was small enough to dismiss as a trick of the wind. But then came the second, harder, and a faint shimmer rippled through the golden wards. Mara rose, the hair on her arms lifting. From the courtyard came the cry of a raven, sharp and wrong, followed by silence. She stepped toward the door, her heartbeat quickening. The air had changed. The wards pulsed once, dimmed, and then, impossibly, flickered out. Far below, she thought she heard voices, low and rhythmic, like chanting. The air filled with the smell of iron and smoke. Her pulse echoed with a sudden, dreadful certainty that someone had spoken Lucian's true name aloud. And in that instant, Mara knew the peace had been an illusion, that the sanctuary was no longer hers alone. Somewhere in the dark, beyond the chapel doors, betrayal was already walking toward her, and though she didn't yet understand how or by whose hand, She knew the path that had begun as an accident of mercy had now become something irreversible. The seal on her wrist glowed faintly red again, and the ancient castle in the distance seemed to shudder, as if the world itself had sensed the moment the bond between human and vampire crossed the point of no return. The night trembled like something alive. The wards that had once glowed around the monastery guttered and died, their golden shimmer fading to ash in the air. The silence that followed was heavy, unnatural, as if the world had drawn in its breath and forgotten to release it. Mara stood in the chapel doorway, the flickering light from a single candle bending in her direction, as though begging her not to move. Yet she did, her hand pressed against the cold stone wall for balance as she stepped into the corridor, her heartbeat a frantic drum in the empty hall. The air smelled faintly of roses and iron, the same scent that had clung to Lucien's blood. It was not a comforting familiarity. It was a warning. Something had crossed the boundary that should have been unbreakable. From outside came a distant echo of laughter, brittle and cold, the sound of someone savoring victory. She turned toward the courtyard and saw the first shadow detach itself from the mist. At first she thought it might be Lucien, returning early from the council, but as it stepped closer, the air around it darkened, rippling like water over glass. The figure was tall, draped in silver-stitched robes that caught the moonlight like a web. Its face was obscured by a veil, but she recognized the voice when it spoke. The king has grown careless. His wards fall easier than they used to. Celine. Her name slid from Mara's lips in a whisper she hadn't meant to release. The woman smiled behind her veil, the curve of her mouth visible even through the fabric. So you know me. Good. It will make this easier. Mara stepped back instinctively, bumping into the edge of the altar. Lucien will be here soon, she said, forcing steadiness into her voice, though her hands trembled. Whatever you're doing, you should stop before he finds out. He will find out, Celine said, but by then, it will be too late. She moved closer, her steps soundless, her eyes glowing faintly through the veil like embers. You think you understand the bond that ties you to him, mortal? You think it's love or destiny? It's a curse, a sickness that has already begun to hollow him from within. Every moment he stays bound to you, his strength bleeds away, his bloodline fades. He may not have told you, but your warmth is killing him. The words struck Mara like a blade. You're lying. Am I? Celine's tone softened into something almost sympathetic. Do you not feel it? The drain between you? The way your pulse sometimes quickens for no reason? The dizziness when he's far away? That is his power burning through you. You are consuming what remains of him. That's why I've come. To end it before it destroys us all. Her hand lifted, and the candlelight bent toward her fingers, drawn by invisible force. You could die quickly, and his curse would die with you, or you could stay and watch him wither until nothing remains but a name whispered in regret. Mara's thoughts scattered, torn between denial and dread. She remembered the flicker of exhaustion she'd seen in Lucien's eyes after every meeting, the faint tremor in his hand, the way his voice had grown softer, slower, as if speaking itself required effort. Had she done that to him? The idea made her stomach twist. If you kill me, she said quietly, you'll doom him anyway. You said it yourself. The bond is complete. My death will tear through him. Celine's smile was sharp as frost. Then I'll call that mercy. Better to die from love than from decay. Before Mara could react, the air cracked with a sound like breaking glass. The candle flames snuffed out, plunging the hall into darkness. A rush of wind tore through the chapel, scattering ash and dust in spiraling eddies. Celine's veil tore free, revealing eyes of molten silver and a face too beautiful to be mortal. "Run if you wish," she said, her voice rising to a hiss. "But understand, there is no salvation for what you've become." Mara ran. The corridors seemed to shift around her, stretching and narrowing, the stones whispering under her feet, as if mocking her panic. Behind her, Celine's footsteps were soundless, but her voice echoed everywhere, overlapping itself like a chorus. He was meant to sleep forever. The seal was not supposed to awaken. You woke what should have remained buried. Mara stumbled into the courtyard. The moonlight fell in fractured beams through the broken archway, illuminating the ruined fountain at the center. The water had turned black, reflecting not the sky, but an image of endless fire. She felt the bond within her pulse once, an ache, distant, but sharp, as if Lucian had heard her fear. Then the world exploded with light. A gust of wind roared through the courtyard, hurling dust and stone into the air. From the mist emerged figures, vampires clad in ceremonial armor, their eyes vacant with bloodlust. Celine raised her hand, and they halted behind her, like puppets on invisible strings. "The King's Guard," she said softly, "or what's left of them. Bound to my will until his ends." She looked almost sad as she said it. He was a good ruler once, but he lost himself to the memory of love. That weakness will not rule us again. She gestured toward Mara, and two of the armored figures moved forward. "Take her, but do not kill her yet. Let the king see what his compassion has cost." Mara backed against the fountain, her breath ragged. "You don't have to do this," she said, though she knew her words meant nothing. The nearest guard reached for her, and instinct took over. She raised her hand, meaning only to push him away, but something deeper answered. The sigil on her wrist blazed to life, gold bleeding into red, and a burst of force threw the guard backward across the courtyard. The other staggered, hissing in shock. The light faded as quickly as it came, leaving her shaking and disoriented. Celine stared at her, astonishment cracking her perfect composure. "So the prophecy is true," she whispered. "You can wield his power." Mara didn't wait for her to recover. She turned and ran toward the eastern arch, the only path leading into the mountains. The wind clawed at her face, her lungs burning as she scrambled over fallen stones. Behind her came the sound of pursuit, the inhuman speed of creatures who did not tire. She reached the edge of the ravine just as the clouds parted, revealing the blood moon in full. The path ahead ended in a sheer drop. She looked down and saw mist swirling far below, lit faintly by a glow that seemed to come from within the earth itself. She heard Celine's voice again, closer now, calm and certain. "You can't run from fate, little mortal. The seal binds you to him, but it also binds you to me. One of us must die before dawn." The truth of it struck her with cold clarity. There would be no hiding, no waiting for Lucian to return. If she wanted to survive, she would have to fight. But how do you fight something immortal? Her mind flashed back to the warmth that had rushed through her veins when Lucian's blood touched hers. The fleeting vision of the golden field and the woman with silver hair, the queen. Perhaps that was the key. Perhaps the bond wasn't only a curse, but a doorway to something older than both of them. She closed her eyes, whispering the words that had come to her in dreams, the melody that had haunted her since the night of her birthday. The air around her shimmered. The mist below surged upward in a column of light, wrapping around her like a shield. Celine screamed, a sound of fury and fear combined. "What have you done?" Mara opened her eyes, and they glowed faint gold, reflecting the moonlight. "You said I woke what should have slept," she said. "Then maybe it's time it truly wakes." The light burst outward, forming a circle that rippled through the night like a shockwave. The guards fell to their knees, their armor cracking under invisible pressure. Selene raised both hands, conjuring a wall of shadow, but the light tore through it, searing the air. For a moment, everything was silent. Then came a sound, like the tolling of a distant bell, deep and mournful, reverberating through the mountains. The light dimmed, and Mara collapsed to her knees, the world spinning. She didn't see Selene retreat into the mist, her form dissolving into smoke. She didn't see the guards vanish one by one. All she felt was the cold stone beneath her palms and the unbearable ache in her chest, where the bond burned like fire. Somewhere far away, across the miles and the blood between realms, Lucien felt it too. He was standing in the council hall when it hit him, a pulse of agony that drove him to his knees. The courtiers gasped, rising from their seats as the king's eyes flared crimson, then gold. "She's in danger," he rasped, his voice breaking through the silence. "She's calling me." He rose, shadows swirling around him, his rage igniting the very air. The council shouted in protest, demanding explanation. But Lucien no longer heard them. The bond had awakened fully, linking his soul to hers. Every heartbeat she spent in pain tore through him like a blade. The power he had buried for centuries surged back, ancient and uncontrollable. The marble floor cracked beneath his feet as he spread his wings, vast, black, and luminous at their edges. "You cannot leave," one of the elders shouted. "If you cross the border, the court will fall." Lucien turned his gaze upon him, and the elder's voice died in his throat. "Then let it fall," the king said, his tone cold as judgment. When he reached the monastery, the sky had already turned red. The wards were shattered, their remains glowing faintly like dying embers. He found her in the courtyard, crumpled beside the fountain, her hands still faintly luminous. Kneeling, he gathered her into his arms. Her pulse fluttered weakly against his wrist. "Mara," he whispered, his voice breaking for the first time in a century. Her eyes opened just barely. "You came. Always," he said, and the word was both promise and apology. "Rest now. You're safe." "No," she whispered, shaking her head faintly. "It's not over." She said, "You're dying because of me." He stilled, his expression unreadable. "That's not true." "Don't lie." He lowered his head, his forehead against hers. "It's the price of the bond," he said quietly. "Every immortal who shares their blood with a mortal gives up part of their eternity. I knew that when I did it." "Then why?" she asked, her voice breaking. "Why would you do that for someone you barely knew?" His answer came like a confession torn from somewhere deep. "Because when you opened that letter, I felt something I hadn't felt since the world was young. You wanted not to be forgotten, and so did I." Tears blurred her vision. "Then let me fix this." "Take it back. It doesn't work that way." He stood, carrying her inside. The air around them shimmered as he whispered a word of power, and the shattered wards flared weakly to life. "Rest, Mara. The dawn will mend what it can." "You said immortals fear loss more than death," she murmured, her eyes closing. "Then let me prove them wrong." Before he could ask what she meant, her hand slipped from his, the sigil on her wrist dimming to gray. He felt the bond falter, a thread snapping in his chest. Panic flooded him. "No," he whispered. "Not yet." He bit his palm, pressing it to her lips, willing his blood to restore her. But the glow didn't return. Instead, a faint warmth spread through the air. A light not of blood, but of something purer. Her voice, soft and distant, echoed in his mind. If mercy demands loss, then take mine. Let it mean something. Lucian cried out, his power breaking free in a surge that shook the mountains. The monastery shuddered as a wave of crimson light burst from its heart, sweeping across the valley. When it faded, the dawn that followed was not red, but gold, and for the first time in 1,000 years, the sun touched the towers of the Crimson Court. And in the center of that light, the vampire king knelt, holding the woman who had traded her mortality to awaken the living heart of his world. The first light of dawn bled through the mist like a wound opening across the sky, pale and hesitant, as if uncertain it was welcome in a place that had forgotten what morning meant. The world held its breath, and then, for the first time in centuries, sunlight touched the towers of the Crimson Court. It was not the violent blaze of mortal daylight, but a gentler radiance, a golden warmth that spread slowly across the black stone, softening its cruel edges and turning the air itself to trembling glass. The castle shuddered as though waking from an endless nightmare, its walls sighing with the creak of thawing ice. Yet within the heart of the reborn light, the throne room remained dark. Lucian sat motionless upon the steps below the dais, Mara's body resting in his arms, her skin pale but serene, her face framed by the faint shimmer of the broken sigil that no longer pulsed upon her wrist. She seemed carved from light and memory, fragile and eternal all at once, and he could not look away. Around him, the marble floor was cracked and scorched where his power had exploded hours before, sealing the monastery's ruins and collapsing the mountain pass. The echoes of that fury still vibrated through the stones. He had not spoken since. The silence that had once been comforting now suffocated him, for in it he could hear her absence. Outside, the court stirred. The dawn terrified them. The vampires gathered in the courtyards, shielding their eyes, waiting for the burn, the scream, the death that sunlight had always promised. But none came. The light touched them without pain, seeping into their skin like warmth after centuries of frost. Whispers rose, disbelief and awe entwined, until one voice dared to speak the forbidden word aloud. Salvation. It spread like fire through dry leaves, a murmur that became a chorus, echoing through corridors and halls. The king had broken the curse, they said. The human had given her life so that the night might end. Even those who had once plotted against him fell silent in the face of the impossible. Only Celine stood apart, her silver eyes reflecting the dawn with a kind of furious disbelief. She had wanted him humbled, not redeemed. Yet even she could not deny what she saw. The light did not destroy. It healed. Lucian did not move when the doors to the throne room opened. He barely registered the footsteps until a faint voice spoke his name. "My king." It was one of the younger courtiers, trembling, kneeling several paces away. "The sun rises. The people await your word." His answer came after a long pause, quiet but sharp as a blade. "Tell them nothing." The courtier hesitated. "They believe she—" "Tell them nothing," Lucien repeated, his voice dark with exhaustion. "If they see this as a miracle, let them, but do not speak her name. Not yet." The courtier bowed and fled. Lucien looked down at Mara again, tracing the curve of her jaw with his fingers. "You were never meant to be their symbol," he whispered. "You were meant to live." The bond that had connected them still lingered, faint, but not gone. It pulsed weakly through his veins, a ghost of her heartbeat. Somewhere in that fragile thread, he could still feel her, distant, fading, but not erased. He closed his eyes and reached inward, summoning the ancient power that had once made him feared across kingdoms. It rose reluctantly, like an old beast stirred from slumber, thrumming with both rage and grief. He let it build until the air around him shimmered, then bent over her still form and whispered the forbidden invocation, the one that broke every law of the Crimson Court. His blood ran black as it spilled from his wrist, seeping into the cracks of the floor. "You gave me dawn," he said softly. "Now, I give you my eternity." The ground answered. The sigil on her wrist flickered, glowing faintly gold once more. He felt her spirit resist, not out of fear, but out of love, as if she were trying to protect him from what he was doing. "Don't fight me," he murmured. "You belong to the light now, but it was born from my blood. Let me follow it back to you." The light around them brightened, threads of crimson weaving into gold, wrapping them both in a sphere of radiance. Outside, the courtyards fell silent as the sun dimmed for a heartbeat, then flared brighter, as if the heavens themselves were watching. In that blinding glow, Lucian found himself standing in a place that was not the court, nor the mortal world. It was a field of endless light, neither day nor night, and in the distance stood Mara, whole and alive, her hair moving in a wind that didn't touch him. She looked at him with a mixture of love and sorrow. "You shouldn't be here," she said. "You broke the veil." "I've broken worse things," he replied, stepping closer. "Come back with me. The world has changed. The sun, your son, has returned. They'll worship you for what you've done." She shook her head gently. "That's not my world anymore. I wasn't meant to stay. The bond demanded balance, my life for their dawn." "Then take mine instead," he said fiercely. "Trade places with me." She smiled sadly. "You still don't understand. The bond doesn't ask for life. It asks for love. You gave that already. What you're trying to do now would undo what we made." He reached for her, his hand passing through her shoulder like smoke. "I can't lose you." "You won't," she said softly. "You'll carry me in the blood that remade this world. Every time the sun rises, it's my heartbeat you'll hear." He wanted to argue, but the field was fading. Light fractured into pieces, scattering into stars. "Lucian," she said, her voice a whisper dissolving into the wind. "Live." And then she was gone, the radiance collapsing inward, pulling him back through darkness. When he opened his eyes, he was on the throne room floor again, his body heavy, his veins cold. The sigil on her wrist was gone, replaced by a faint mark on his own, a golden ring encircling his palm like a sun etched into flesh. He understood then. She hadn't died. She had transformed, becoming part of the light that now lived in his blood. The doors burst open again, and this time it was Celine who entered, her face pale, her eyes wide. "What have you done?" she demanded. "The dawn grows stronger by the hour. The sky burns with your name." He rose slowly, his movements deliberate, the new mark gleaming faintly with every step. "I ended the night," he said. "You ended our nature," she spat. "We are creatures of shadow. The light will unmake us." "No," he said. "It will free us." She drew her blade, its edge glowing with silver fire. "You were our king," she said. "Now, you're just another myth that forgot how to die." Lucien didn't draw a weapon. He simply raised his hand. The light that flowed from his palm was not violent. It was gentle, sorrowful, irresistible. It struck Celine not as a blow, but as a revelation. Her blade melted into dust. She fell to her knees, gasping as sunlight poured through the shattered windows and touched her face. Tears streamed down her cheeks as she whispered, "It doesn't hurt." "It never did," he said. "We only believed it would." She looked up at him, and for the first time since he had known her, she smiled. Then maybe mercy isn't weakness after all. When she vanished into the light, there was no scream, only peace. The rest of the court followed. Those who had hidden emerged one by one, their fear dissolving under the warmth that filled the air. Some wept openly, others simply stood in awe as the black banners of the old reign crumbled to dust. The castle itself began to transform, the obsidian walls turning translucent, the river of silver beneath its foundations glowing like molten glass. Lucian walked among them, silent, his eyes distant, until he reached the balcony overlooking the valley. The world beyond shimmered in colors unseen since the first dawn. For the first time, he felt no hunger, no thirst, no pull of blood, only the echo of her laughter, soft as wind through the grass of the light-born field. When he spoke, his voice carried to every corner of the court. The age of darkness is over. No more hunting. No more fear. From this day, we will live as children of twilight, neither cursed nor blessed, but free. The air trembled with power as his decree sealed itself into the world's fabric. 1,000 hearts, human and immortal alike, felt the shift. The veil between life and death thinned, not to invite chaos, but to allow compassion to pass through unchallenged. Night returned at last, but it was different now. The stars burned brighter, and the moon's light carried warmth instead of hunger. Lucian stood alone in the throne room, the silence now gentle rather than suffocating. On the marble beside the throne, he placed the single candle from Mara's diner, the wick still faintly scented with sugar and wax. He lit it with a breath. The flame burned gold, unwavering even in the draught. "Happy birthday," he murmured. "You're not forgotten." As the candle flickered, its light spilled across the floor, tracing the pattern of the royal sigil. But where it once bore the crown and drop of blood, it now formed a sun encircled by a heart. The new emblem of the Crimson Court shone briefly, then settled into the marble, eternal. Outside, the first rays of dawn touched the mountains again, and the world, reborn, whispered her name in gratitude. And the king, no longer bound by shadow, turned his face toward the light and closed his eyes, knowing that in every sunrise to come, she would rise with him. The sun lingered long after dawn, spreading a golden haze that softened everything it touched. The ancient stones of the Crimson Court, gleaming with hues no eye there had seen in 1,000 years. The air was still heavy with silence, but it was a different silence now. Not the kind born of fear or waiting, but the quiet that follows the end of pain. The vampires moved like people waking from a dream, their pale faces warm with a faint glow that had never belonged to them before. They could feel the sun upon their skin without burning, could breathe the air without tasting blood in every exhale, could exist without the hunger that had defined them. Some wept, some knelt in disbelief, and others simply stood staring at their hands as if they no longer recognized what they were. The curse had not died with the human girl. It had transformed, reshaped by her final act of mercy, and by the king's grief turned to devotion. The Crimson Court was no longer a citadel of shadows, but a city reborn, its towers open to the sky, its rivers now carrying light instead of blood. Yet amid the rebirth, there was mourning, quiet but unending. For though she had saved them all, the woman who had done so was gone from their world, leaving only the memory of her name whispered like prayer. Lucian walked alone through the great hall, the marble still etched with cracks from the night of her sacrifice. Each step echoed softly, measured, deliberate. The throne that had once been a symbol of dominion now stood empty, draped in white cloth instead of red. He no longer wore his crown. He had left it on the altar in the chapel where she had fallen. His people followed him with reverent distance, bowing but not daring to speak. He was no longer the ruler they feared. He had become something else, something they didn't yet know how to name. When he passed, the air felt lighter, and the scent of roses followed him. He made his way to the balcony where dawn met the ruins of the mountains, where the monastery had once stood. From there, he could see the land healed by the light they had created together. Valleys of green where ash had been, water running clear over stone where blood once flowed. Every color seemed sharpened, as if the world had decided to live again after centuries of holding its breath. The bond between him and Mara had not vanished entirely. It existed in a quieter form now, not as pain or power, but as warmth. When he closed his eyes, he could feel her presence like sunlight resting on his face, intangible, but real. Sometimes, when the wind passed through the halls, it carried her voice, faint as memory, but enough to make him smile. "You see," it would seem to say, "you lived." Those words had become his vow. He spent the days that followed traveling through the lands his kind had once ruled through terror, undoing the laws that had bound humans and vampires to endless conflict. The old order resisted at first, but even the fiercest of them could not stand against what they had seen. The light that had spared them, the king who had walked through it unburned. The myth of the Blood King became something else, a story of redemption, of the night that chose to forgive the day. At the heart of the transformed court, the former hunting grounds were turned into gardens. The soil, long poisoned by centuries of blood, now bore flowers of strange and radiant colors, white tinged with red, petals that seemed to shimmer faintly in moonlight. Lucian would often walk among them at twilight, the time between day and night, when shadows were soft and the first stars began to appear. It was then he felt her presence strongest. Once, as the air filled with the hum of cicadas, he knelt by a cluster of small white blossoms and whispered, "You said every sunrise would carry your heartbeat, but what of the night?" The wind rose briefly, stirring the petals, and he heard her voice, clearer than before. "Then I am the silence between stars." The sound of it undid him. He bowed his head, eyes closed, and for the first time in centuries, he prayed, not to gods or spirits, but to the memory of her compassion that had remade his world. Years passed, though the word no longer held meaning for creatures who had forgotten time. Mortals came to the Crimson Court, not as prey, but as guests, drawn by tales of the eternal dawn. They built homes beside the ancient towers, sang songs in both mortal and immortal tongues, and told their children the story of the Waitress who brought the sun back to the world. Her story became legend, changing with every retelling, yet always keeping the same truth: that mercy could outlast eternity, that a single heart could alter the course of worlds. The vampires learned to live alongside those they had once feared, their hunger tempered by the light within them. Some called themselves guardians, others pilgrims, but none forgot the night of transformation. Lucian, though still called king, refused to sit upon his throne again. He preferred the gardens and the library, where he kept the letter that had begun it all, the crimson envelope still sealed in places where the wax had not melted. On quiet nights, he would read her handwriting over and over, even though he had long since memorized every curve of the ink. It was not a royal decree or a prophecy anymore. It was a promise, a bridge between what was and what could be. Sometimes he wondered if she would have laughed at what the world had become, at the sight of vampires tending orchards and mortals teaching them the art of laughter. He imagined her behind the counter of her old diner, wiping the tables and humming that forgotten melody, while the neon sign outside flickered in the warm light of morning. He imagined himself sitting by the window, anonymous and content, watching her live. That was his heaven. Simple and unreachable, but real enough to keep him moving. One evening, as twilight deepened into the soft violet of near night, he returned to the balcony once more. The sky was filled with stars, and among them, one burned brighter than the rest, a golden point that seemed alive. He raised his hand toward it, not in sorrow, but in greeting. "You kept your promise," he said. "No one forgets." The wind carried the scent of roses again, though no flowers grew on the high stone where he stood. He felt her presence surround him, a pulse of warmth that matched his own heartbeat. For a moment, the world itself seemed to pause, caught between memory and eternity. Then he smiled, faint and peaceful, as the light of the star shimmered across his face. Below, the city of the Crimson Court glowed softly under the moon. Children laughed in the streets, where once screams had echoed. The rivers reflected the starlight, golden and serene. And far away, in some realm beyond reach, a woman with gentle eyes watched it all with quiet pride, her spirit woven into every sunrise and every flame. She had not been forgotten. She never would be. And the king, who had once feared mercy, now lived by it, his immortal heart bound not to blood or power, but to the fragile, eternal grace of a single human life that had taught even the dead how to love again.